From soaring rent prices to the gentrification of cities to a massive housing shortage around the world, more and more problems are being attributed to Airbnb, or the quote-unquote Airbnb effect.
It's no surprise rent prices across central Texas have skyrocketed, and there is a number of contributing factors, but some believe the Airbnb effect could be one of the reasons behind it.
Now, this Airbnb effect is what people are accusing Airbnb and short-term rentals of creating. Short-term rental operators like us are the supposed culprits behind the changing neighborhood characters and the lack of decent housing in cities around the world.
Your fault. Your fault. Your fault. Your fault.
But are short-term rental investors really to blame or not? I feel like it's important to know these things because as hosts and short-term rental investors, it's what we do for a living. And as local government and jurisdictions around the world try to restrict short-term renting, what the public thinks of the industry could potentially affect the kinds of regulations that they create. So we need to know the issues that are surrounding Airbnb in regards to the housing shortage and to understand what degree are we really contributing to it.
Why are you blaming me?
Now, the big question is, how short are we really on houses? Now, according to different estimates, we're lacking between 1.5 and 5 million homes right now. And what's the cause of this shortage? Well, experts agree that the primary cause is that we simply aren't building enough houses in the last few decades. The housing market crash during the Great Recession also pulled back on construction for a lot of years. And while Airbnb may be contributing to the shortage we're seeing now, there are a host of other factors that have created this massive problem. Reason number one, population density in urban areas. Now, most people live in cities for obvious reasons. That's where the jobs, the universities, the hospitals, and all the services and infrastructures are. But the problem is that land in the city is limited. Not only is it expensive, it's also finite and often very tight. Now, various sectors are competing for its use. Industrial, residential, commercial, transportation, recreational, among other industries. Now, you can't just add land to a city and you can't add as many houses as you want, because in most cases, areas are already zoned and restricted for specific use. So you ultimately just end up with people not being able to live wherever they want. And it's not like they can't live somewhere within the city, it's just they can't live in the exact buildings, street, or the neighborhood that they might want. Now, land, especially developed land, is a scarce commodity and it's not unlimited. Reason number two, construction costs. Now, it is very expensive to build homes these days, and COVID-19 shutdowns didn't help at all either. It caused supply chain and labor issues. That means builders couldn't get the materials that they needed and construction projects almost ground to a halt. Reason number three is luxury versus affordable housing. Most new residential development is being made for the upscale market. Things like high-end townhomes and condos, simply because that's where the money is. So obviously developers and investors aren't putting their money into the cost-efficient or affordable housing because there's no incentive for them to do so if they're able to make so much more off of higher-end properties. Now, it is interesting to note though that most of the effects Airbnb has on the rental market are felt most by folks from high-income, educated, white neighborhoods. Now, that's according to a Harvard study. So what that actually means is our business is impacting mostly the high-end sector of society, not those needing affordable housing the most. Fourth reason is that there are more single homeowners. More and more people are living alone in their homes. Married couples are separating, getting divorced, young adults leave home as soon as they can, and fewer singles are getting married. At the same time, there's still population growth.
Let's make a baby instead.
So you can see that we're growing in numbers, but because families are breaking apart, we all tend to spread out and need more houses. You know, maybe it's part of our Western culture to blame. Do you find big families living together here as they do in the East? No, you won't find 3 generations living under the same roof as they do in other parts of the world. It's just part of the culture.
Tall, thick, a big, physically big family.
The impact of Airbnb on housing availability. The potential to make money by short-term renting is no secret, and that's why Airbnb has been growing exponentially since launching in 2008. And in the past few years, the number of active short-term rentals in the city has increased to 56.6% since 2019. In 2020 alone, sales of vacation homes in the US surged by over 44% over the previous year. Regular folks with savings or stimulus checks started buying apartments and vacation homes to rent them out. Wealthy people with second homes listed their properties on short-term rental platforms, and many long-term landlords shifted to short-term. This also contributed to the long-term housing shortage in many parts of the world, pushing up rent prices in most major cities. For example, between 2021 and 2022, the average rent across the US rose by 15%, and in some cities were hit even harder than others. The rent has gone up by more than 30% in Seattle, Cincinnati, and Austin. Even worse damage has been done in New York, Los Angeles, and Nashville. For renters who don't have enough money to cover the increase, there aren't many options. So what's happening is people looking for housing now have to compete not only with other potential tenants, but also with short-term rental investors. Professional investors have deeper pockets than typical tenants because they make money each month. And in the past several years, large real estate investment firms have snapped up as many properties as they could to make money off of the craze. According to the watchdog group Inside Airbnb, real estate investment firms have contributed dramatically to the growth of Airbnb. In fact, it's been reported that 1/4 of hosts on Airbnb own nearly 2/3 of all of the listings. According to the Harvard Business Review, when Airbnb listings in a city increase, so do rent prices. Granicus, a company that provides cloud-based support for the public sector organizations, said that the short-term rental industry grew 800% from 2011 to 2016. Quoting a paper published by the National Bureau of Economic Research and UCLA, it said a 10% increase in Airbnb listings leads to a 0.42% increase in rents and 0.076% rise in house prices. And given those stats, the actual 800% increase in short-term rental listings those 5 years would be responsible for a 33.6% rent increase over that period. For comparison, the median household income in the US grew only 18% between 2011 and 2016. And what concerns many is seeing hundreds of homes sitting empty during certain times of the year due to seasonality because of this foreign ownership of Airbnbs. Meanwhile, locals and newcomers from out of state can't get any place to stay. So housing experts agree that cities with a lot of non-owner occupied Airbnbs are the ones that should be watched more closely.
I see you.
The impact of Airbnb on neighborhood character. Famous cities seem to be impacted the most. Studies on the so-called Airbnb effect show that over-tourism in big cities like Amsterdam, Barcelona, Edinburgh, and Los Angeles are not only bad for house prices, but also communities hosting short-term rentals. And it's because platforms like Airbnb make it easier for people to rent out their homes to tourists. In Barcelona, where the government stopped issuing new Airbnb licenses in 2014, local residents would complain of tenant expulsions, harassment, and daily nuisances, as well as disruptions caused by illegal Airbnbs. Over-tourism is also causing folks in Edinburgh, Venice, and Hawaii to complain about loud parties, parking congestion, weakened social cohesion, and losing that small old town feel. The gentrification for sure is changing many local neighborhoods' character. As more and more tourists visit and wealthy people move in, new businesses are created, the kind of businesses that cater mostly to tourists and the upscale market. In Amsterdam, for example, bike rental companies are replacing small grocery shops where neighbors used to touch base. Longtime residents faced with soaring rent prices are priced out of the housing market, and families with children are forced to move away since they can't afford to live in their chosen areas anymore. Could this be contributing to a further gap between the rich and the poor? Well, that's what one study found. Airbnbs are making it harder for ordinary folk to live in certain places. Gentrification also helps to revitalize neighborhoods, yes, and they do improve the physical appearance of the town, but it also displaces hundreds, if not thousands, of less privileged people in those towns. The impact of Airbnb on the local economy. It's obvious that Airbnb brings economic gain to the areas it operates in. Short-term rentals provide additional income for residents while increasing room inventory for a variety of visitors. Airbnb says that 3/4 of its listings are not in touristy areas, and 42% of guest spending is done within neighborhoods that they visit. That means money is going to the communities not typically served by hotels. According to alltherooms.com, Airbnb generated gross revenue of $48.9 billion worldwide in 2021. Here alone in the US, it made $4.2 billion that year. Tipalti, an accounting software company, says that Airbnb hosts earn an average of $13,800 each year worldwide. The top 3 countries making the most money on Airbnb are the US, which averages around $44,000 per year, Australia, which is $27,900 a year, and the UK, which is $22,100. That's how much money is being pumped into local economies where Airbnbs operate. Locals in these places do gain from all the guest spending. Local shop owners, restaurants, bars, attractions, service providers all get that cash flow from Airbnb guests in their neighborhoods. On the government side, local counties, cities, and states are getting really good income from TOT, which is a transient occupancy tax, which is what guests have to pay whenever they book on platforms like Airbnb. But because of the so-called Airbnb effect, many local governments around the world are struggling to keep the short-term rentals in check. The jurisdictions that have been most impacted usually do the following: limit the number of guests, nights, durations, portions, or the number of properties that can be rented out. Most require licenses, information provision, and certain safety precautions. Other counties only want short-term rentals to be the primary home of the owner. Still, other counties take more of a relaxed approach, allowing Airbnb to operate so that way the counties can collect that tax money and enjoy the economic benefits that Airbnb brings. Again, it all depends on the local government, but here's what big cities around the world have done. In New York City, buildings with 3 or more units, it's illegal to rent out short-term rentals without a host being there for less than 30 days. Short-term rentals occupied by the host are allowed, but fines can be up to $7,500 per violation. In San Francisco, where Airbnb is located and also founded, short-term rentals weren't even allowed before the regulations were announced in October of 2014, but many people kept using Airbnb. When the laws went into effect February 2015, hosts had to sign up with the city. Short-term rentals in owner unoccupied homes with 2 or more units can only be used for up to 90 days a year. Single-family homes and owner-occupied units can be rented out for an unlimited number of days. Hosts are also required to live at the unit at least 275 days a year. Accessory dwelling units or ADUs aren't even allowed. Fines for rule violations are up to $1,000 per violation. In Germany, most states have a misappropriation prevention law, which allows cities to control the conversion of residential housing. Aside from having to pay taxes and fees, hosts are only allowed to rent out a portion of their apartment at a limited period time per year. In Berlin, a short-term rental permit allows you to rent out 50% or more of your main residence for a short period. And in Munich, you can only rent out your home for 8 weeks per year. In London, short-term rentals for homes are limited to just 90 days a year. In Paris, it's 120 days per year. In Tokyo, home sharing was legalized only in 2017, and it's capped at 180 days per year. So what these policies try to do is walk a fine line between the conflicting interests of different stakeholders: hosts, guests, the local community, Airbnb and similar booking platforms, and even the hotel industry. And don't get me started on what the hotel industry is trying to do to Airbnb. I have a separate video that goes into detail about that.
That's interesting.
So these attempts may be insufficient or too much depending on what side you're on. One restriction could be the bane for one sector, but it could also be the boon for another. So all of this to say, it's hard to strike a balance between renters' affordable housing concerns and hosts' income source needs, between the hotelization of quiet neighborhoods and keeping them quaint and quiet, and between the community's economic gains and its potential losses. So to wrap this up, the Airbnb effect. What can be done with an industry that's grown and continues to grow faster than communities want, and what governments can cope with. Given the housing shortage in many places, I think it's fair to say that Airbnb shouldn't be allowed to run wild and eat up what little remaining long-term housing there is. But it shouldn't be too heavily restricted or outright banned, because it does bring in a very good income to both citizens, communities, and governments. There are many ways to restrain short-term renting, and the methods have to be decided by each town, city, or county. And these regulation restrictions are just the short-term approach. The longer-term one would be to find more ways to build more houses, limit density in city, and encourage more development outside of tight urban areas. Ultimately, we all want a healthy mix of everything: affordable housing, short-term rentals, and nice, quiet neighborhoods. And maybe even hotels. But apparently there is an Airbnb bust happening right now, which could be the end of the profitable days that we saw in the past. The question is this real or just fake news? So watch this video to dive into the data to see what's actually happening. Until next time, Host Nation, keep on hosting.